let me first say thank you to the Monterey County Business Council, the Monterey County Convention and Visitors Bureau, the Marina Chamber of Commerce. It's wonderful to speak to this group that helps businesses coordinate, communicate, and remain in contact with not just our government, but with our community. Let me also congratulate Harvey Dodwell. Harvey, this is a wonderful event, a wonderful hotel. I know you worked hard. It was funny, I didn't know Harvey, but the first time I saw him was in one of his restaurants over in Salinas. And I had an idea of who he was, but I wasn't sure. Next thing I know, I see this guy come in the door, and he starts picking stuff up off the ground. Little straw wrappers and straws. Next thing I know, he's taking out the garbage. And I realize who it is. And it just tells you that that's the type of mentality Harvey has. He's concerned with the details. He's concerned with the little stuff. And Harvey, if you're that concerned with those restaurants as you're concerned with the Springhill Suites, I know this place is going to be wonderful. So thank you very much for what you're doing. Let me also thank Marianne Leffel. Marianne, you remind me of somebody I grew up with. She works right down here at the Panetta Institute. And I know how to deal with personalities like Marianne because of the way I grew up, and you just basically do whatever she says. And the reason you do that, the reason you listen to Marianne is because she gets things done. And so Marianne, thank you for your contributions to what you do, especially for our community. Thank you. I cannot stress enough that this is a real honor. This is a real honor being here at the Springhill Suites, but also being here with all of you. I couldn't imagine, having grown up here, couldn't imagine that I'd be standing here on the former Fort Ord at the grand opening of a wonderful hotel like the Springhill Suites. Because as we know, this place, Fort Ord, the military base, clearly had an impact on our community. But now, with the transition of Fort Ord, the military base, to Fort Ord, the civilian base, and with places like the Springhill Suites, we are continuing to affect not only this immediate area, but we're continuing to affect and impact the Central Coast of California. Now, Fort Ord, as a military installation, can't stress enough the impact it had on our community. Since it opened as the Giggling Reservation Firing Range back in 1917, 1.5 million troops trained and toiled here on these sand dunes that we're looking out on and on these rolling oak-lined hills that we see to the south. During World War II, the Great Generation came through Fort Ord before earning that title in the Pacific and Atlantic theaters. And many of those men and women who came here because of Fort Ord, they stayed here, they raised families here, and they returned to retire here. Those families contributed to the diversity of and the development of our communities here on the Central Coast of California. Clearly, Fort Ord also had an impact on our families, on my family. During World War II, as you mentioned, was back then, my grandfather had Carmelo's Cafe at the bottom of Alvarado Street, and he shared it with Dominic Luscri, who had the bar in the back. It was called Dominic's Bar. They weren't too original back then, but it worked. And there's, it was the hopping place back then, and there was a good reason why I heard stories of why my grandfather kept a baseball bat by the cash register. But it was a good business, and that business earned him enough money to buy a place out in Carmel Valley, the place where my father was raised, the place where I was raised, and the hometown where my wife and I now raise our two daughters. It's clear that Fort Ord contributed to my grandfather's living out the American dream, contributing to the fact that he gave his children and his grandchildren a better life. And Fort Ord contributed not only to our sense of family, to our sense of community, but also to our sense of country. My father, as you've heard him speak, he tells the stories of how during Christmas time, during those war years, my grandfather would have soldiers, young soldiers who were far away from their families, he would have them over for dinner at their house. And my father, I believe, that was part of the reason why he then served in the military. And actually, he was stationed here at Fort Ord back in the 60s. And I can tell you that my father's service led to my military service. But it was also because growing up here, you couldn't get away from Fort Ord being a military base. It was part of my life. I mean, I remember being out in Carmel Valley at night, hearing ordnances go off, looking over the hills and seeing the flashes of light from these ordnances. You can't imagine that now. I remember walking down Alvarado Street, seeing the camouflage uniforms everywhere. I remember being told to stay away from the club on Fridays and Saturday nights. But I also remember the respect that my father and my mother gave to those soldiers who came into that office that had an issue that they needed help on. And that was very important, because that respect and that service to those soldier members and to all constituents here on the Central Coast is the main reason why I'm in this position today. Because that personal service to our constituents, to me, that is my priority. To me, that is my #1 job. But clearly, the Fort Ord that I represent today is much different than the Fort Ord that all of us knew at one point. Much different than the Fort Ord that my father represented. Today, the former Fort Ord is no longer solely tied to the military. We've diversified in our environment, in our education, and clearly standing up here in our economic development. And that makes us better positioned to deal with changes in our economy and in our government. And that is why the former Fort Ord still affects the lives of all of us here on the Central Coast. Young men and women no longer come here to train in the military, but they come here for an education at a world-class university. It's a place where they can go to get a secondary degree, or they can go to law school at Monterey College of Law. Instead of doing a strenuous road march, they can take a ride on a mountain bike or a horse, or just take a hike in the Fort Ord National Monument. It's a place where very few ordinances go off today, unless they're clearing them. But fortunately, that doesn't happen too often. And rather than hearing guns at the shooting range that we all saw along Highway 1 growing up, all we hear now is the ocean. Our service members and veterans can get state-of-the-art health care at that beautiful building right over there, thanks to Congressman Sam Farr. And as Sam Farr likes to say, if that doesn't work out, then there's always the Central Coast Veterans Cemetery that our veterans can go to as well. That's his joke. I couldn't. But because of the work he did on both those projects, Sam can say that joke, let me tell you. Thank you, Sam. And then we also have the Veterans Transition Center, a place where our homeless veterans can go and get the services, get the shelter that they need, that they deserve to continue being a part of our community and continue their service in our community. Young families can afford to live here now, possibly in the same military housing that my mother and father had, but hopefully maybe in one of these nice new places that are right over there. They can get health care and health prevention at Montage right across the way. And our families, my families, our students throughout Monterey County, throughout the Central Coast, can shop right here at these places across the street. They can go see a movie. They can get a haircut like I did last week. I know, you're saying, I get it. Trust me, I'm still in denial at this point. But they did a pretty good job. They can eat at a restaurant. And of course now we have the Springhill Suites. It is a place, I believe, that continues to carry the tradition of Fort Ord. This hotel allows people to come here, to stay here, and to contribute to our community. Our farmers, our foodies, the wine tasters, the golfers. Next week, get ready, the car aficionados, the environmentalists, the mountain bikers, and the hikers. These are people who want to come here and experience our beauty, experience our bounty. They want to experience what all of us experience every single day of our lives. This hotel allows this place to continue contributing to our families. It's where people can stay, where we can put up our in-laws when they come and visit us. It's where parents of students can come and visit and stay. It's where wives and husbands of veterans can stay. It's where families of patients at Montage can stay. And from here, they can go into the former Fort Ord, or they can go out into the Central Coast. As Congressman, it's nice, it's wonderful to see a hotel that will continue to give people the opportunity to come here and stay here and contribute to our local economy. But I have to say, as someone who has deep, deep roots in this area, as someone who grew up here and as someone who is raising his children here, I am proud to see this hotel on the former Fort Ord that will continue to contribute not just to our economy, not just to our community, but to our families in this place that all of us here today call home. Thank you.